Matthew chapter 10, Jesus calls us to discipleship, and oh, you can't read that at all. Wow, bummer. I don't know if you'll be able to read the other slides then or not. Didn't help much. You can turn these off. Now we're really in the dark. In more ways than one. I don't know how much that helped, but we'll have a day in the dark, okay? Okay, kids, behave. The lights are off. Okay, when we left off last week, the last verse of chapter 9 had Jesus telling his disciples to pray for workers in the harvest because there's plenty of harvest to be taken care of. At this point in time, the harvest referred to pretty much everyone, thus the great need for workers. So Matthew continues the story with Jesus now sending out the first workers into the harvest, and that was what turned out to be the disciples. He gave them instructions and warnings and told them about the reality of what it meant to be a disciple of his. And it wasn't going to necessarily be an easy walk, so Jesus is giving them a talk about what all of this is going to mean to them personally. But this talk is more than just this first trip. It's for the future of these 12 men and even for all of us today. There is application for us. Let's look at the first two verses and see how Jesus starts the talk. Now you can read that a little better. And he called to him his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every affliction. The names of the 12 apostles are, and I did not list them off here. The point of this is that he's using the term disciple and apostle. So what does disciple mean? We talked about this in our high school class today. The Greek is mathetes, and it generally means one who engages in learning through instructions from another. It can mean a pupil or an apprentice. And then apostle is derived from the Greek word apostolos, meaning literally one who is sent off or to send forth, and it was originally used by the Greeks for the personal representatives of the king, the ambassadors who functioned with the king's authority. Matthew starts by calling them disciples and then switches up the term to apostles in verse 2. It is interesting to note that this is the only place where Matthew refers to the 12 as apostles. The rest of the time, he just refers to them as the disciples. But their role was about to change, and Jesus was sending them out as his ambassadors or representatives. Thus, Matthew chooses to use a different term, apostle, to signify what was about to take place. Matthew goes on to name the 12 for us, and Mark's account tells us Jesus sent them out in pairs. It is of interest that they are named here in pairs. I don't know if you noticed that, but in the ESV, the division is, they're listed in pairs. So are these possibly the pairs they were sent out in? Don't know. Possibly the order of when they were chosen? Could be. We don't know exactly why this order of the names here, but obviously the one who would turn out to be the most significant, Peter, is mentioned first, and the scourge of the group, Judas Iscariot, is listed last. Jesus had been teaching and training them for a while, so now it was time to send them out to practice everything they had witnessed Jesus doing. But before they go, he has some very specific instructions for them. Thank you, although I do work well in the dark. So he gave them these specific instructions. First, he tells them who to go to and what to do, and that was the first 4. So do not go to Gentiles or enter a Samaritan city. And remember, the Samaritans are the half-Jews, and the Jews weren't real thrilled with them because they were only half-bloods. The next one is only go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. The third one, preach the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The same message as John the Baptist, who I am now fondly calling JB, and Jesus. Number 4, they were to heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, and cast out demons, which is all following exactly what Jesus had done and had been doing. The next 4 is where Jesus tells them what to take and where to stay. So do not acquire gold, silver, or copper. Don't take extra clothing, shoes, or a staff. Find believers in the city to stay with and greet them with peace to those who are worthy. And those who won't listen, move on. There are those who would like to apply these same instructions to us today, but if we look closely, these instructions seem to be for a specific mission which is a bit different than the mission we have been called to today. Part of the purpose of this mission was to show this particular group what it meant to depend totally on God's provision. They were about to be shown how God would provide to them in every way possible, which would even include being able to do the same miracles that Jesus did. The lesson we can take away from this is that Jesus calls, but he also equips for the exact job he has for you to do. That part is the same. He promised these men that they would be equipped for the job he was sending them out for, which is exactly what he does for us today. But the job he has called us to do is a little different than that. So what are those differences? Well, we're called to the entire world and to proclaim the complete gospel of Jesus Christ. Are we still supposed to heal? Maybe. But it would be through prayer and asking God to do the healing, for God to cast out the demons, for God to decide if it's time yet for someone to die. We can ask God, but he will decide how to answer those prayers. The second group of 4 instructions only apply to us in that if someone totally rejects Jesus, we are to move on. Jesus already said not to cast our pearls before swine. So here he is explaining what that may look like, and we can certainly take that to heart today. The next section, verses 16 through 23, is a warning of what they will experience. Not just opposition, but to the point of being brought before the authorities. However, Jesus assures them not to be concerned. They will have the right words to say when they need them. We have no evidence that any of the apostles struggled with opposition during this first mission trip out. So Jesus' words would be more for what was to lie ahead for them after he was gone. And not just for them, but for any down through the ages who would stand for God's truth. And we know of many that have been martyred in the name of Christ. Opposition and persecution will come, but God will continue to provide what's needed at just the right time. Let's move on to verse 21-22. Brother will deliver brother over to death, and the father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. It appears this opposition will even include division within their own families, which may have been very difficult for them to hear, as it is for us now. But we all know that the gospel of Jesus Christ can divide families on a massive scale. I'm sure that all of us in this room have family members who are unbelievers, many who are devastatingly antagonistic toward anything Jesus-related. Those verses are difficult to read because there may come a time in our own country that we will face what other cultures experience. The betrayal that may come at the hands of family members. That's not a pleasant thing to think about. Verses 24 through 42 are instructions for all of us as Jesus is now explaining what it means to be his disciple. He provides several nuggets that we can hold on to as truth no matter what our lives may bring. We're going to take a bulletproof, there's a term, there's a thought. How about a bullet point look at what Jesus shares with the overarching message being fear not? To clarify, much of this content comes from Warren Wiersbe. So this slide is Jesus calling us to discipleship, and it's basically fear not. So that would be the next slide. There you go. Oh, what happened to number 1? Don't know. Sometimes things don't come over quite right. So number 1, it says fear not at the top, which you can't see. And then number 1 is suffering to be expected. Verses 24 through 25. Let's review each of these. Suffering is to be expected. Jesus was persecuted. Why should we expect anything different? What does that look like today? Well, the term cult has become popular to explain away any belief that is not totally in line with the world's mantra of anything goes. Its use is becoming more generally attributed to any belief that has a strict moral stance. And the term cult is scary for many, so that alone is causing Christianity to become the enemy. This is not the beginning, but a continuation of the decay of American civilization. We as Christians are now often considered the enemy. And if you're alert to anything online at all, you'll understand the truth of these words, that we are more and more being deemed the enemy, and anything that issues any kind of a moral stance is considered just right extremism, and we have been labeled basically as cults. Number 2, God will bring everything to light. Defining anything moral as a cult is a way that deception is used to undermine truth. When Christians speak out and take a stand, they are shining a light onto the darkness of the lies of the enemy. We have nothing to hide, but the enemy has everything to hide in order to maintain control of this world. But we know in the end the secrets of men's hearts will be revealed and they will be judged. But until that day, we must stand firm on the truth, shining our light wherever we are called to do so. Number 3, fearing God alone. All that men can do is kill the body, and if they do, the believer's soul goes home to be with the Lord. But God is able to destroy both body and soul eternally. This truth was caught in Martin Luther's hymn, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God," when in verse 4 he writes directly from Matthew 10. Do you know that he wrote this in 1529? 1529. So the last part of verse 4 goes, "Let goods and kindred go," your family. "This mortal life also, the body they may kill, God's truth abideth still. His kingdom is forever." God cares for his own. Matthew says that 2 sparrows are sold for a cent, but Luke says that 5 are sold for 2 pennies. So sparrows were so cheap that they threw in an extra just for good measure. I thought that was funny, actually, that they classified 2 different things into the Gospels. Yet our Father knows when a sparrow falls, and aren't we more valuable to him than a sparrow? He even knows the hairs on our heads to the extent that each is numbered individually. When God protects his own, you can count on him because he cares so much. Next one, number 5. Christ honors those who confess him. To confess him means much more than to make a statement with the lips. It also means to back up that statement with how we live our lives. The walk and talk must go together. When we are faithful to confess Jesus as our Lord and Savior, we are able to share the benefits of being one of his. Our lives show that we are his, and he is faithful to claim us as his own. Number 6, we cannot escape conflict. Once we have identified with Jesus Christ and confessed him, we are part of a war. We didn't start the war. God actually declared war on Satan back in Genesis. Jesus denies that there can be peace. Had Israel accepted him, he would have given them peace. But the people refused him, and the result was a sword. His ultimate goal was peace, but his message brought division, as again Jesus shares that households will be divided against themselves. We must proclaim above all else our love for Jesus, and that must come first, above even our own family members. Jesus tells us we must take up his cross and follow him. If not, we're not worthy of him, as our memory verse this week tells us. Verse 39 of that verse presents us with only 2 alternatives: spare your life or sacrifice your life. There seems to be no middle ground. Since spiritual conflict is inevitable in this world, why not die to self and let Christ and let win the battle for us and in us. After all, the real world war is actually inside. Our self-centeredness versus sacrifice. Last one, we can be a blessing to others. Not everyone will reject our witness. There are those who will welcome us as an ambassador of Christ and receive a blessing. But the blessing depends on the attitude of the host. If the host receives the ambassador as a prophet, a spokesman for God, then he gets one reward. If he receives him only as a righteous man, there is another reward. But even a cup of cold water given with the right spirit brings its own reward. This whole last section was all about discipleship, what it means to be a disciple of Christ. As we look at this list on this slide, we see what the costs are to being a committed follower of Christ. So the question today is, are you willing to step up to full discipleship? Following Christ every step of the way? It does require something. It requires more than lip service. It requires a life lived for him. May you choose today to live your life fully for him. Become a full disciple of Christ today. We're going to close today with singing "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." And if you think about this song, we're going to sing with this is actually a choir from Chennai, India, our fellow group in India. And they're at the St. Andrew Kirk, which is the Scottish word for church. So they're in Chennai, India, and if you want to stand, we are going to sing this song together.